Hi, everyone. Joe Camacho here, the Vector Control Specialist for Target Specialty Products covering the Western United States. So, our training department has asked me to give a little bit of a mosquito management update for 2021 and talks about some of the new and cool things that are happening in the mosquito control world. And before I start any talk, I'd love to show this great video produced by the PBS station to help us a little bit understand a little bit better mosquitoes. And so, we're going to watch this first and then we'll jump right into it.
This is the deadliest animal in the world. Mosquitoes kill hundreds of thousands of people each year. The most vulnerable people, children, pregnant women. No other bite kills more humans or makes more of us sick. So what makes a mosquito's bite so effective? For starters, they're motivated. Only females bite us. They need blood to make eggs. And a pool of water for their babies to hatch in. Even a piece of trash can hold enough. At first glance, it looks simple, this mosquito digging her proboscis into us. But the tools she's using here are sophisticated. First, a protective sheath retracts. See it bending back? If you look at a mosquito's head under a microscope, you can see what that sheath protects. And inside there are 6 needles. 2 of them have tiny teeth. She uses those to saw through the skin. They're so sharp you can barely feel her pushing. These other 2 needles hold the tissues apart while she works. From under the skin, you can see her probing, looking for a blood vessel. Receptors on the tip of one of her other needles pick up on chemicals that our blood vessels exude naturally and guide her to it. Then, she uses this same needle like a straw. As her gut fills up, she separates water from the blood and squeezes it out. See that drop? That frees up space to stuff herself with more nutritious red blood cells. With another needle, she spits chemicals into us. They get our blood flowing more easily and give us itchy welts afterwards. And sometimes, before she pries herself away, she leaves a parting gift in her saliva. A virus or a parasite that can sicken or kill us. There's nothing in it for her. The viruses and parasites are just hitching our ride. But this is what makes mortal enemies out of us and mosquitoes. They take our blood. Sometimes we take theirs. But often not soon enough. Good, you're still there. These are the larvae of Culex pipiens, aka the common house mosquito here in California. Gross, right? Well, you can avoid them by emptying your rain gutters, pet water dishes too. While you're at it, subscribe. We have so many more science videos coming your way. See you next time.
So there we go. That was a great video produced by the PBS station. And I like to show that. And I often in person ask the question, what did you learn new from that video? And hopefully you found something that you didn't know before about mosquitoes from that video. And we'll just go from there. So let's talk a little bit about mosquitoes. They are a true fly from the Diptera order, and they are a member of the Culicidae family, or the mosquito family. And we'll talk a little bit about their morphological structures of an adult mosquito to help us. These are the things that I'm going to point out today are things that are going to help us in the field identify the types of mosquitoes that we're going to talk about today. And so we have some items we want to, let me get out my laser pointer here. Here we go. We have the proboscis. That's what we saw in the video. That's the organ that pierces the skin to be able to draw blood meal from the female mosquitoes. And then if you look real closely, right next to each proboscis on each side are something called palpuses or palpi. They're little sensory organs, and depending on the length of those, it can help us identify the different genuses of mosquitoes. So whether they're short or they're long, there's only one genus of mosquitoes that have palpuses that are equally as long as the proboscis. And so in the field, that's one of the first things we look at to see those things, to identify what genus of mosquito we're looking for. We can see their palpus to determine if they are a certain genus or not. And then when we talk about the legs of a mosquito, the femur, tibia, and tarsus of the leg, those are often used to identify where striping marks are. On a lot of mosquitoes, mosquitoes will have stripe marks at the joints. And depending on whether it's on the femur side or the tibia side of the joint, helps us identify what type of mosquito or species of mosquitoes that it is. We look at the abdomen shape, whether it's a blunt abdomen or a pointed abdomen. And when we see a couple pictures of mosquitoes here in a second, you'll be able to identify that real quick and easy. The really pointed abdomens are very pointed compared to a blunt, and very easy to identify with an eye. When we look at the wings, there are these lateral veins that give the wing structure. On a couple species of mosquitoes, there are some very strategically placed cross lateral veins. And where those veins are located on the wings help us identify what species it is. And then finally, the antenna of the mosquito helps us identify the difference between a male and a female mosquito. And if you think about humans, males are typically more fuzzy, more hairy than females are. And so when you see a very hairy antennae, like you see here in this picture, you know that that's a male mosquito as compared to a female mosquito. In California, we have 9 different genuses of mosquitoes, a total of 58 different species of mosquitoes. And the 4 that you see here are your generally public health considered mosquitoes. The Culex genus of mosquitoes are the ones that transmit West Nile virus. We're going to talk quite a bit about that today. We have the Anopheles mosquitoes that transmit malaria. Luckily, in the United States, we typically don't have any locally transmitted malaria cases, but we do have the mosquitoes to transmit malaria, and we often have quite a few travel-related malaria cases, so that's always a threat. And we talked about that pointed abdomen. You can see a very distinct pointed abdomen on the Aedes mosquito here. It's very distinct as compared to this Culex, where it's quite blunt. And so a pointed abdomen lets us know that we're dealing with the Aedes mosquitoes. And for the most part, there are 3 species of Aedes that are of a public health significance. We have Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus that transmit the Zika, chikungunya diseases. And then Aedes syriensis is our tree hole mosquito that transmits dog heartworm. Another publicly important medical species. And then there's a long list of other mosquitoes that are out there that are in several other different genuses that are all mainly nuisance mosquitoes that cause problems in the sense of they bite humans, and it makes us a nuisance. They aren't necessarily public health threats, but they are considered a nuisance, and we do control those mosquitoes as well. We're going to talk quite heavily about the Culex mosquito today and West Nile virus. And so we have the 2 species, or technically 3 species of mosquitoes that transmit West Nile virus. We have Culex tarsalis, and then we have kind of what we call a complex. Depending on where you're located in the state, typically the northern part of the state has a species called Culex pipian, where the southern half of the state has a species called quincufasciitis. Culex quincufasciitis, and it's really just kind of a north versus south state. Morphologically, phenotypically, they are exactly the same. It's just genetically, there's a little bit of a difference between the 2. And when we get into that area right in the middle, we get a little bit of a complex where they might be either or a little bit of combination of both. But these 2 or 3 species of mosquitoes are the main West Nile virus transmitters. And if we remember back to the late 1990s, early 2000s, when West Nile virus came to the United States, the federal government and local and state governments did a very good job of explaining to the general public and educating the general public on the life cycle of the mosquito. So the Culex mosquito, as an adult, the female comes onto the surface of the water, and she lays what is called an egg raft that might have 200 to 300 eggs in a raft right on the surface of the water. Those eggs will mature on that surface of the water for a couple of days and eventually hatch into the water column as larvae. In that water column, they'll go through 4 instar developmental stages, eventually turn into a pupae, and then within a couple of days emerge as an adult. And these Culex mosquitoes that are responsible for transmitting West Nile virus like to breed in pretty calm, kind of clearish water, if you will. So things like abandoned swimming pools, ornamental ponds in our yard, stagnant. This here is a creek nearby my home that actually doesn't flow very fast because of beavers that have blocked it, and so we get Culex breeding in those, and just natural ponds that we might find in nature are all perfect sites for the Culex mosquito to breed in and around our homes. And they're the ones mostly responsible for West Nile virus. So West Nile virus has no treatment or vaccines for humans. And so when it comes to preventing people from contracting West Nile virus, our best way to prevent that from happening is local vector control agencies. So throughout the state of California and most of the United States, there are public health agencies on a county or city level that is responsible for controlling mosquitoes in a wide area or landscape level situations. They do a lot of public education to teach people about ways to avoid West Nile virus. And then, of course, the best and most effective way is for ourselves to take personal protective measures to prevent us from being bitten by mosquitoes. So when we think about West Nile virus, California reports more West Nile virus than any other state in the United States. So it accounts for about 18% of all of the cases in the United States, but California itself only has about 12% of the U.S. population. So overwhelmingly, compared to other states, California is always the leader in West Nile virus throughout the nation. And when we look at those who are susceptible to West Nile virus, it's predominantly male individuals simply because they're typically outdoors more often during the dusk and dawn times than females. And typically the age group, when we look at that, is the older individuals that contract West Nile virus more than the younger individuals. How that system works, or how the transmission cycle happens, is West Nile virus is reservoired in birds, specifically corvids like ravens and scrub jays here in California. There, the West Nile virus is able to incubate in the bird population. And then as mosquitoes mature and begin to reproduce, the female mosquito needs a blood meal. Believe it or not, the Culex mosquito's most favorite blood meal is from birds. And so a female mosquito that isn't affected with West Nile virus will take a blood meal from a host, from a bird that is a host of West Nile virus, and then become infected herself. And typically that transmission cycle happens within the birds and the mosquitoes. And then occasionally, we as humans and our horses are considered accidental hosts, meaning if an affected female mosquito is looking for a blood meal and doesn't find a bird and comes in contact with us as a people or our horses, we or our horses can become infected with the West Nile virus. The interesting thing about it is horses and peoples cannot infect an uninfected mosquito. And so if we contract West Nile virus and an uninfected mosquito bites us, we don't carry enough viral load in our system to be able to infect a mosquito. That mosquito can only get West Nile virus from the bird population. So some of the symptoms of West Nile virus, as we come out of COVID and learn a lot about symptoms, we realize that most symptoms kind of all mimic themselves, all mimic flu-like symptoms. And so with West Nile virus, fever, headache, fatigue, body aches, and vomiting are all some of the symptoms of West Nile virus. Now, when it comes to most people, 4 out of 5 people, or 80% of the population, will show no symptoms at all for contracting West Nile virus. In fact, it's not uncommon at all for an individual to donate blood at their local blood bank and to get a phone call a few days later notifying them that they had West Nile virus. That's not uncommon at all. It happens quite often. And then about 1 out of 5 people will show some of those symptoms that we see there. And then there is a very severe part of West Nile virus that's called the neuroinvasive part of it. And that's 1 out of 150 people. Less than 1% of people will be affected that way. And that what that does, it gives them an encephalitic response where their brain swells. It affects their nervous system. You can have a little bit of vision loss, some numbness, paralysis, and of course the most severe would be a fatality caused from West Nile virus. So let's look at West Nile virus throughout California. This is all part of the educational system to help us be more educated on how to avoid West Nile virus. When we look throughout California, 44% of all West Nile virus cases happen in 10 counties, or 17% of the whole population of California, or about 2% of the land area of California. Starting in Southern California, we have Orange, Los Angeles, and Riverside County, moving up through Kern County, into Tulare County, through Fresno, into Stanislaus County, going into Sacramento and up through Butte. So essentially the Central Valley and the more populated other areas of Southern California is where most 44% of all West Nile virus cases happen. So if you live in those areas and those neck of the woods, it would be pretty prudent on you to make sure you take precautions to protect yourself from West Nile virus. And we're going to talk about those ways to reduce that risk here in a little bit. Since 2003 is when West Nile virus first came into California. It came to the United States in 1999 in New York, made its way across from the east to the west, and made it into California in 2003. So this graph shows 3 things. First, it shows these large bars are the number of cases of mosquito samples that tested positive for West Nile virus. So one of the things that the public health agencies do on a very large scale is trap live adult mosquitoes during the evening times, take those mosquitoes back into the lab and do genetic testings looking for West Nile virus in the mosquito population. Helps us better understand when we need to do adult control methods, missions, and it gives us an idea of what the disease level or threat is, or risk is in the mosquito population. So we have, over the years, you can see these spiking effects of West Nile virus. As we go forward into 2021, it's been a couple of 3 years since we've had a spike, and so I wouldn't be surprised if this year or maybe next year we might get a spike in West Nile virus. You'll also see this red bar down here. This is the number of fatalities that happen from West Nile virus. And then now this squiggly line here is actually the number of mosquito samples that tested positive. These are the number of human cases. So I confused that up. I apologize. Number of human cases are the bars, the mosquito samples that tested positive each year. And you can see that direct correlation. As mosquito samples go up, the number of cases of human cases go up. And in years that it's down, you see that same effect going along with each other. So when we talk about an individual who's contracted West Nile virus, we look about when that contraction happens, when that infection happens, and typically it's in the late summer to fall months. There's a biological reason to that. It takes a little bit of time for a mosquito population to develop a viral load to be able to feed on enough birds to ingest not necessarily ingest, but to bring into the body of the mosquito the West Nile virus. So it takes a little bit of time to build up that viral load in the mosquitoes to transmit it over to an individual on a season-to-season basis. So that's why you see late summer, early fall times when mosquito populations are infecting the people the most. And so when an individual does contract West Nile virus and has to go into the hospital, they're in the hospital for quite a few days. On average, they're in the hospital for 12 days. An 18-year-old or less is in the hospital for just a few days, and then over 60 years, they're over the 12 days. Either situation, almost half of the patients who do contract West Nile virus and have to spend some time in a hospital get discharged to some sort of supportive care, whether that's to a home or a nursing facility or some other kind of rehabilitation center. Most of the people do have to have extended care, supportive care, besides just their hospital stay. So now, I mentioned a few times about reducing our risk. The I wanted to talk about West Nile virus today was to educate you. Now, how do we avoid contracting West Nile virus? And so there are several campaigns, media campaigns, educational campaigns revolving around the letter D. Today I chose to highlight 3 Ds. I've seen as many as 7 Ds. So today I'm just going to talk about essentially 3 or 4 of them. We talk about DEET, or DEET is a type of repellent. So a personal protective measure to spray on ourselves is 5 different types of active ingredients for that. DEET, D-E-E-T, is one of those. Picaridin is another. Oil of lemon eucalyptus, and a product called IR3535. Essentially what that means is we have different manufacturers that produce repellents. So DEET is the off brand of mosquito repellent. There are other brands of mosquito repellents that produce use these other active ingredients. The mosquitoes that transmit West Nile virus are typically most active at dawn and dusk. And so if we can wear DEET or other repellents during those times, wear long sleeves during those times, or simply avoid those times when there's heavy mosquito biting pressure, that allows us to reduce the risk of contracting West Nile virus. And then we always want to emphasize drain. Drain any standing water that might be around our home, whether it's bird baths or wheelbarrows or rain gutters or rain barrels. We want to make sure we eliminate those standing water sources where mosquitoes will breed. The other major disease risk in California is Zika, dengue, and chikungunya fever. And those diseases are spread by these 2 mosquitoes called Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus. Although there's a few differences between the 2, they are generally the same behavior of mosquito, and so we'll talk about them together. There are some differences behavioral-wise between the 2, but in general, for this kind of a talk, I think it's well to talk about both of them. Both of these mosquitoes only fly a few hundred feet at the most from where they emerged out of the water source. And so unlike the Culex mosquito that might have a range of a few miles, these guys don't like to go very far at all. They like to stay as close to their breeding source as possible. And unlike the Culex mosquito, these Aedes mosquitoes bite throughout the entire day. They are active daytime biters. And so one of the first questions we should ask customers when we are investigating a mosquito issue is, what time of the day are they getting bit? That'll help us identify where they might be coming from. And then unlike the Culex mosquitoes that land on the surface of the water and lay an egg raft of several hundred mosquitoes, these 2 mosquito species will lay their eggs in multiple sources and only a few at a time. It's a behavior called skip oviposition, meaning they jump from site to site depositing eggs, and it's a mechanism that helps them perpetuate from season to season. It's kind of like throwing spaghetti on the wall, if you will. They don't know whether the container or the source that they're laying the eggs are going to have any water exposure anytime soon. And so we're just going to throw a bunch out there and see what happens. And so when they lay their eggs, unlike the Culex mosquitoes, the Aedes mosquitoes lay their eggs on the edge of a container or the edge of the water source. So they will land on the water, and then that female mosquito will go to the edge of the container and lay her eggs right at that water line edge. And she'll lay maybe 6 to a dozen more, but not a whole bunch in that container. She knows that eventually, at some time in the future, those eggs are going to be inundated by water, whether it's a natural rain event or sprinklers turn on or we go water our flowers. Something's going to happen to inundate or submerge those eggs in water and allow them to hatch into the water column. They go through the same metamorphosis as the other mosquitoes. They go through 4 instar development stages. They turn into a pupae, and they emerge as an adult. And for these mosquitoes, in the warmth of summer, that could happen very quickly. From the time those eggs get submerged in the water to when they become an adult, could be as little as 4 to 5 days. And so now we're talking about containers that have fluctuating water depth to them. So things like bird baths, the saucers on the bottom of a flower pot, tires are a great example in somebody's backyard that get some sprinkler action to them every once in a while to fill up the tire. And abandoned swimming pools are also another great source for these Aedes species, as water gets put into those abandoned swimming pools or unmaintained swimming pools, whether it's rain or sprinklers or hoses. That's a great place for these types of mosquitoes to breed and live in. And so when we talk about the Zika virus, the main virus spread by these mosquitoes, it was first discovered in Uganda in the 1940s, late 1940s. Uganda is a very jungly place that has lots of monkeys. And so the transmission cycle in that Savelic cycle was between mosquitoes and monkeys. As time moved on and as people encroached, that transmission cycle now included humans. And so in places in the world where monkeys and humans coexist, we get that transmission from the monkey population into the human population. And then, unlike West Nile virus, this is one of the only mosquito-borne diseases that can transmit human to human through sexual contact and pregnancy. And so we'll talk about that here in a second. Some of the symptoms for Zika virus, again, much like any other common cold, fever, rashes, headache, itchy eyes, joint pains, fatigues. Normally, those symptoms last for 2 to 7 days. And like I said before, Zika can spread from a female to her fetus. And so, anybody that gets Zika virus should treat themselves like the common cold, get plenty of rest, drink a lot of fluids, treat pain and the fever with common medicines. And again, like West Nile virus, there is no current vaccine for Zika virus. In the unfortunate circumstances when a female transfers the Zika virus to her fetus, the baby is born with what is called microcephaly. Essentially, it's a smaller head. The developmental process of the brain slows down, and thus the skull doesn't have to grow with the size of the brain. And so you get this instance with an infant that has a smaller head. And some of the challenges associated with microcephaly in infants and toddlers are developmental delays. They'll have troubles balancing and walking around. Definitely some difficulty in swallowing, have some vision and hearing problems as well. And so it is a major concern that we have in California, especially since there are so many locations where these mosquito species have been found living amongst us. They are a very urban mosquito and live in our backyards. And so on this map you see here, spread out from Southern California as far north as Shasta County up in Redding, California, we have instances of both Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus, the mosquitoes responsible for transmitting Zika virus. And each year, besides these last couple of years with COVID and travel restrictions, we always have travel-associated Zika virus infections. So an individual travels to a part of the world where these mosquitoes are locally transmitting the disease, become infected in their location that they're traveling to, return home, and then develop the symptoms, go see a doctor, get tested, and find out they have Zika virus. And so anytime we're in a place where there's travel-associated Zika virus infections and the mosquitoes are present in that city, there's a risk of developing local transmission, like what we had in Florida a few years back, where an individual or many individuals travel, contract the virus, return home to where the mosquito species are, and now develop a local transmission situation, something we try to avoid very heavily in California. And to my best knowledge and guesstimation, it's a matter of when it's going to happen, not if it's going to happen. Eventually, at some point in time, we'll get some sort of local transmission of these viruses in California as travel begins to pick up again here without COVID restrictions, and as we learn more about where we find these mosquito species. So let's do a little case study. Let's talk about a situation where you get called out to a home, like a typical home you might see anywhere in urban California. The first thing you're going to do, like any other first-time go into somebody's home, you're going to do a residential inspection, right? We're going to survey the property to look for mosquitoes, whether they're adult mosquitoes or whether they're larval mosquitoes growing in the water. And we're going to, as much as we possibly can, as part of our IPM, practice exclusion and source reduction, right? Looking for window screens that have major holes that allow those mosquitoes to enter freely into homes, door gaps, anything that's going to allow something that's a 1/4 inch or smaller that's going to allow a mosquito to enter into a home. And then we're going to make them aware of those situations. And then you might consider, as kind of a secondary add-on, being able to replace those screens that need those things. Definitely what we call in our industry, what we call tip and toss, meaning tip over anything that might be holding water, tip it over, dump it out, drain it. And if we can, as long as it's not grandma's or great grandma's flower vase, we're going to try to get rid of that as much as we possibly can. So a situation like this, there are thousands of spots in this picture here where a mosquito might be developing in a larval stage in water, inside wheelbarrows, inside buckets, who knows, in trash, anything that's essentially a bottle cap or bigger that can hold water is a potential breeding site for these mosquitoes. And so another opportunity to have an add-on service is trash removal. We're going to look for places where they like to harbage during the day, through the heat of the day. Mosquitoes are very small, delicate insects and need to have some harborage from the hot, dry sun. One of the sites that most often gets overlooked are patio decks. If you can imagine the temperature gradient and the moisture difference underneath this deck would be dramatic compared to outside on top. And this is a great daytime resting site for an adult mosquito. Any place that would harborage mosquitoes that would provide a good temperature gradient and an increase in humidity is where the mosquitoes are going to congregate, whether that's a man-made structure or vegetation in our backyard. And then you have probably seen hundreds, if not thousands of these, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. These are my arch nemesis. These rain barrel collections are great when they're brand new and newly purchased, but over time they degrade and provide access into the water source for a mosquito to lay eggs and to breed in. And so if I was to go into a backyard and see these would be one of the first places I would go check to make sure that they are secure, just like our home. That anything that's a 1/4 inch size or bigger and will allow access to a mosquito to that water, I'm going to make sure I can cover up. This might be an opportunity to sell brand new rain barrels to an individual. So we've inspected this house, and this is what we found. All right, it's a normal residence, and I put air quotes around normal. It's a 1/4 acre lot. There's an outdoor living space out here in the back by the swimming pool. Luckily, they don't have a garden, but there is lots of heavy vegetation all around for daytime resting sites. And this place has called you asking for some mosquito relief. Right? When you did that inspection, you found a few things. You found our trusty nemesis, the rain barrel. You found some flower pots that might be have some places for mosquitoes to be produced. You definitely found some containers from a construction they might have been doing inside the house that had filled up with water. You found a bird bath in their backyard. And then, of course, they had a wonderful little ornamental pond. All places we've talked about before of identifying places that mosquitoes might reside and recover from the day at daytime resting sites or larval breeding sites. And so now you're going to engage the customer, right? You're going to communicate with them a treatment plan. You're going to explain to them the expectations that you have and what expectations you have from them about trimming excess vegetation. We're not asking them to go to bare ground, but if they have overly overgrown brushes and shrubs and such, you're going to ask them to reduce that vegetation. You're going to ask them to change out the water in their bird bath on a weekly basis, completely exhaust the water in there and fill it back up, dump out those containers that are holding standing water. And then the customer always wants to go the green approach and be the most environmentally friendly, so they want to do mosquito traps. And so let's talk a little bit about mosquito traps and the types that there are. There are essentially two types. And the first type we're going to talk about is what's called host-seeking traps. They use some sort of attractant to bring the mosquitoes in. And you can see these commercial grade traps. This is called a New Jersey light trap. This is called a mosquito magnet. This is called a CDC mini light trap. These are all mosquito traps that the public health industry uses on a regular basis. But they're not very, very aesthetically pleasing, are they? Could you imagine going to your resident and suggesting hanging this off the side of their house? Resident probably isn't going to be very happy. But there are some more aesthetically pleasing traps produced by a company called Dynatrap. So let's watch a little video about them, and we'll talk about them here in a second.
If you've been looking for a better way to fight mosquitoes and other flying insects, look no further. Dynatrap operates quietly and simply, without requiring propane or other chemicals. Simply plug it into any wall outlet and flip the switch. You won't even notice it work until you begin to see the results. UV light from Dynatrap provides a warm attraction to flying insects. Carbon dioxide emitted from the unit mimics our breath, creating an irresistible attraction. When insects approach, Dynatrap's quiet, powerful vacuum fan draws them into a retaining cage where they dry up and die. Without chemicals, without sprays, without zapping, Dynatrap can be placed anywhere within the entrapment area, including areas of human traffic. Stop zapping. Start trapping with Dynatrap.
All right, so it looks pretty good, right? There's a lot of pros to those kinds of traps, these kinds of host-seeking traps. They do a great job of being a generalized adult trap. They'll collect a lot of different kinds of mosquitoes, not just the ones that transmit West Nile virus. So they do a very good job at that. But that's what they do, is they collect mosquitoes, specifically dawn and dusk mosquitoes, specifically the Culex species of mosquitoes, right? So they do a very good job of collecting or attracting mosquitoes that are seeking a host, mosquitoes that want to bite somebody, that want to take a blood meal to go lay eggs. And so that's, for that purpose alone, is the main reason why I don't, on the most part, recommend using a mosquito trap that attracts host-seeking mosquitoes, because they haven't bitten somebody yet. They're looking to bite somebody. And if you were to put up 2 or 3 of these Dynatrap traps in somebody's backyard, and an individual or a family was to have a party and there was 5 or 6 people out there, the attraction of 5 or 6 people is much greater to the mosquito than the 2 or 3 Dynatraps. And so the Dynatrap might bring in the mosquitoes when you're not there and get them into your backyard. And then when you go out into the backyard, you now become the mosquito trap for a mosquito that's looking to bite somebody. And so therein lies the challenge with these types of mosquito. For the most part, in a normal, quote unquote, normal residential home, I would try to avoid using these types of traps simply because they are attracting biting mosquitoes. So the other type of mosquito trap is called a Gravid trap. And what that means is this type of trap attracts a mosquito that is ready to lay eggs. So she's already bitten an animal or a person and has a blood meal and is generating eggs and is now wanting to go lay those eggs somewhere. And so the risk of being bitten by a mosquito attracted to this trap is almost nothing. And so they're non-toxic, they're pesticide-free. Typically, they don't require a power source. They're very lightweight and economical. And they attract female mosquitoes that are looking to lay eggs. Some of the cons, we'll talk about that here for a second. Some of the cons is they do collect a less variety of species. And so they are going to be very effective for your Aedes mosquitoes and your Culex pipiens or Quincke fasciitis, depending on where you're at in the state. They do a very good job for those. And they do require a little greater service interval to make sure, specifically for the Catchmaster trap, to make sure that the glue board is serviceable for the mosquito. And so we are going to have to service it a little bit better. And so the one that we recommend from Catchmaster is called the OviCatch. That's its trade name. It's a type of autocidal gravid ovitrap, and what that simply means is autocidal meaning they're going to kill themselves. Gravid means it's a pregnant female, and ovitrap is we're going to catch them where they're depositing their eggs. So an autocidal gravid ovitrap, or AGO trap. It was developed by the US CDC and tested and is very effective. Each ovi catch that you see here is essentially a 5-gallon container with a capture chamber and a glue board. And so at the top of this bucket is the capture chamber and glue board of this expanded view that you see right here. And so you have a glue board that encircles the edge of the capture chamber. And so when a mosquito is attracted to this trap from the water that you put into the bucket, and when you add a little bit of vegetation to it, it makes what we call a hate infusion. That smell attracts the female mosquito to lay eggs. When she can't get access to it because it's screened, she gets tired and wants to land on the edge where you have a glue board, and thus we trap the mosquito, right? And so we're using the behavior of the mosquito itself to trap and collect that mosquito. And so when we look at this bucket, it's a 5-gallon bucket. It's black. It has some writing on it. Again, might be a little bit difficult to convince a homeowner to put this around their home. So what Catchmaster has done is they've developed, and it should be coming out very soon, what they call the Ovi Planter, a little more aesthetically pleasing device. Again, a very similar approach with a catch chamber that's in the center of this garland or fake vegetation. Again, still 5 gallons of water inside the container here. It's a little more aesthetically pleasing to our customers to be able to place those out. And so when we place 3 or 4 of these out on an average regular household, we can do a pretty good job of reducing the population around a home. So that's what in our case study. So that's what we decided to do. We decided to deploy out some traps. But again, one of the things we have to learn is that there is no such thing as 100% mosquito control. And this video from Jerry Maguire helps me understand it.
You don't know what it's like to be me out here for you. It is an up at dawn, pride-swallowing siege that I will never fully tell you about, okay? God, help me! Help me, Rod. Help me! Help you. Help me. Help you. Help me. Help you.
So how many times have you felt like Jerry Maguire talking with a customer, right? Trying to engage them in their own pest control to help you help them, right? And of course, we always get that response, just as Rod gave Jerry Maguire. We get laughed at. We have to educate the people for them to know that there is no such thing as 100% mosquito reduction. That is never going to happen. And the use of repellents is a very good answer to that. People are always going to be bitten. What we do is we try to reduce the biting pressure. We do not try to stop them from getting bit. We simply reduce the biting pressure. So we've deployed some traps. They are still getting some biting pressure, and so they've asked you to do a little bit of larval control around their home. If you remember, they had an ornamental pond, and so there's several different kind of products available to help us control the larvae in the water before they emerge as adults. We'll save the details of that for another talk, but there are options out there. If you have any questions about those products that we have available, contact your local sales rep and we'll be able to help you out with that. One of the main reasons why I try to shy away from having you guys do larval control is because there's this wonderful permit called the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, that regulates any kind of pesticide use into natural water bodies, or what's called waters of the United States. And so depending on what that water source is, we may or may not be able to treat. Things that are natural water body sources, would definitely be this creek. Storm drains, believe it or not, are actually waters of the United States because they typically drain into this. This pond or reservoir inside this homeowners association could or could not be a waters of the U.S. It all depends on where it drains. The French drain in somebody's backyard off a downspout from the rain gutter may or may not. It all depends on where it drains. But there are sources that we can treat that are not natural water bodies. You know, fountains, the rain barrels, for sure we can treat those, tires and swimming pools. So again, not going too deep into things, we do have to realize on what it is, where we're studying or where we're applying those larvicides at, because there might be other implications to it. And so let's just say we decided to treat her little ornamental pond that she has, and we treated the rain barrels. And we dumped over those containers that were holding water in that inspection that we found. And still, the traps that we put out are collecting mosquitoes. We are still getting mosquitoes in the backyard. We've done all of this work. Now they're calling us and asking us, we're paying you money to eliminate us from getting bit. We're still getting bit. You're not doing anything. But in reality, you've gone out and done a lot of things. Well, that's when we have to take a step back, right? Now we have to look at what's going on in the neighborhood, because we're not dealing with a very localized pest. We're dealing with a landscape level pest, and a pest that can fly miles or hundreds of feet. And so on this little map, you can see right here in the center, here's our star. This is our home that we're talking about. And let's look at what's happening in the neighborhood. We see these little green dots pop up. Those little green dots, each one of those little green dots is what we call a stormwater drain or a catch basin that's on the street that collects the rainwater or urban drool and moves it off of the landscape. And so each one of those storm drains is a potential breeding site. And if it has water in it, it's probably not potential. It is probably actual breeding site. You don't have any control or authority over those storm drains. And so they might be producing, and this storm drain right here might be the cause of why they're getting bit. We don't know that for a fact, but that's a very good potential. Take a look at this section right here. Anybody have any idea what that section is? Well, that section is a cemetery. It could be a very large cemetery. And each one of those holes that holds the flower vase, it doesn't have a flower vase in it, will collect sprinkler water from when they irrigate their lawns. And then each and every single one of those can be a potential breeding source for mosquitoes. So just in this picture alone, we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 potential breeding sources in this picture here alone. There could be hundreds, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands, I'm not sure. Definitely thousands of these little vase holes throughout this entire cemetery. And then what about this park over here? We didn't go check out that park. We looked at we see the park, we see that tree line. They probably have to irrigate somehow. We walk over to the park and we see this over there, and we see that this happens in the middle of summertime. That is definitely going to produce mosquitoes. So my point is as good of a job as we do with putting out traps and reducing the water sources in somebody's backyard, the mosquitoes probably are not coming from, or at least all of the mosquitoes are not coming from our client's backyard. They could be coming from the neighborhood and probably are. And so that's when we have to look at adult mosquito control. And so when we look at adult mosquito control, what I get to do is I get to do a lot of cool things. I get to play with helicopters, humongous airplanes like the C-130 coming at you. I get to play with crop dusters that put out mosquito chemicals. And recently I get to start playing with UASs, or unmanned aircrafts, to help control mosquitoes. And so my first suggestion is you to go out and buy one of these nice $4 million C-130s so we can treat some mosquitoes. Of course, that's a joke, and that isn't going to happen. So let's talk about some of the things that you guys can do for controlling mosquitoes. Now, this is for adult mosquito control, right? So those mosquitoes that are coming from the cemetery 2 blocks away, the catch basins or stormwater drains on the street, maybe somebody's abandoned swimming pool behind you. A lot of different sources are now coming to your customer into their backyard, and so now we need to do some adult mosquito control there. So for whatever reason, whatever way the stars, the sun, and the moon all line up together, backpack mist blowers produce the best droplet spectrum to control mosquitoes and do the best job of penetrating vegetation and daytime resting sites of mosquitoes. So as you see in this video, this individual is treating all the daytime resting sites, places where mosquitoes might be resting during the day, waiting to come out at dawn or dusk to bite you. And so droplet size, pressure and penetration into the vegetation, and where we treat are all important aspects to using these types of machines. So when we talk about droplet size, we can look at it in a couple of ways. I like to use the example of a golf ball, a baseball, or a softball, and a basketball, right? If it's a baseball or softball size droplet that we're looking for to kill a mosquito, anything that's a golf ball size or smaller is going to be a sublethal dose and not be effective. And anything that's a basketball size or bigger is just going to be a huge dose and a waste of product. And there's going to be a lot less droplets of the big basketballs than there are of the softball sizes. And so that softball size for mosquitoes is 100 microns, the size of a human hair. And that's exactly what a backpack mist blower does. It produces droplets anywhere from 80 to 120 with an average of 100 microns. And that's the droplet size that we're looking for when we're trying to put material or chemical onto vegetation to control mosquitoes. The backpack mist blowers do a very good job of penetrating vegetation. This was a study done looking at different types of sprayers, and really the most important thing to look at is this yellow or this orange line here. This is a backpack mist blower, and it shows that at 1 meter depth or 3 feet into a vegetation, we got well over 50% of that vegetation covered with barrier treatment to control mosquitoes. And so it does a very good job of penetrating into vegetation. Now, that doesn't mean in any way, shape, or form that we can't control mosquitoes with our normal backpack sprayer, right? They are versatile equipment. They are remarkably less expensive than the Maruyama backpack sprayer. There's obviously not a gas engine on it, so it's much quieter, but it does require a little better understanding of mosquito behavior and the technique of spraying to control mosquitoes with that. I can tell you, I have all the confidence in the world that I can do a very good job with a backpack sprayer and kill mosquitoes all day long because I have the knowledge and understanding and know the behavior of the mosquito. And so if we're going to use that to control mosquitoes, a little bit of training and a little bit of understanding goes a very, very long way. Remember, the objective when we're treating with a barrier treatment is to treat daytime resting sites of mosquitoes, places where it's a lower temperature and a higher humidity than the surrounding area. We can talk about all kinds of different kinds of chemicals to use. One of my favorites to use is called OneGuard from MGK, simply because it has a couple of different modes of action into it. It not only is an adulticide that has lambda-cyhalothron and prelethrin in it to control adult mosquitoes, but it also has a compound called pyriproxyfen, which will control larval mosquitoes. So when this female mosquito comes in contact with the OneGuard, she will absorb some onto the feet of her pads, and when she goes and lands on the water surface to lay eggs, she will deposit pyriproxyfen into the water that will control the larvae in that source. And so we have a couple of different modes of action, and it does a very good job, has a very good residual. One of the things that I do a lot of is residual evaluations, looking at how long products look. And so we'll go out, we'll spray some vegetation that you see here, and then we'll, on a weekly basis, pick the vegetation that we sprayed, take it back into the lab, and put that vegetation into tubes, and then expose mosquitoes to those tubes of vegetation to look at how long of a residual control we get with the product. And so this product was OneGuard, and we looked at this product for over 15 weeks, and even at week 12, we were still getting over 80% control, a little over 80% control on those mosquitoes exposed to the OneGuard. And so that's pretty good residual. This particular study was done in the Coachella Valley out by the Salton Sea, very hot and dry temperatures on oleanders that grow very fast. And so that's really good results that we got. Now, there are lots of options. OneGuard is not our only option. If you are already using some sort of spray for other insects, Demand and Archer is a great combination. Bear has a lot of great options with their Suspend product and their new Barracore product, which is available. If you're a Bifin IT guy or gal, that's another great option for you. So there are other options out there that do a very good job at controlling mosquitoes. And so based on what it is you're currently already using, we can probably already fold into what you're doing a mosquito management plan. So with that, I want to say thank you for watching. Appreciate anything, and I'll be around for questions. Thanks.